Hey everyone, I'm Stephan Kesting. This is my friend Elliott Bayev. And Elliott has given a ton of thought to curriculum development for blue belts, taking people from white belt to blue belt. And I know that when I started and when Elliott started, it was basically the Wild West. You'd learn a technique here and you'd learn a technique there and you'd see a technique shown at a seminar. This was before YouTube. I remember when putting techniques on YouTube changed everything. So now there's a lot more information, but there's still often a lack of structure. Mm-hmm. Or if there is a structure, then you're forced to go with the structure of that particular organization. So my question to you, and what I'm hoping we can talk about, is what do you need to learn to make it to blue belt? So what is a reasonable amount of stuff to know by the time you get to blue belt so that you don't have any huge holes in your game and that you can hold your head up and say, no, I'm a legit blue belt.
Sure. Well, I think we first have to understand what is a blue belt. Theoretically, it's a competent player, someone who maybe is not an expert in a ton of things or even anything, but they're competent in at least some basic situations. Doesn't mean they're going to be competent in advanced positions and sophisticated instances, but they will have a basic level of competency theoretically in all the areas, all the basic areas that they need to be ready for. In order to understand that, and even if you're watching this, you're brand new to Jiu-Jitsu, I think even what we're about to talk about will be useful. What you need is a bit of a framework to understand what you should be learning and what you should know. So the way I like to introduce people to Jiu-Jitsu is with an overview of the basic positions. And I like to start with 4 basic positions. And the way I like to start this, if I can get you on your back, Stephan. So all of Jiu-Jitsu is based on a strategy for how does a smaller person overcome a bigger person. It starts with this 3-phase strategy of close the gap, get really close to them, take them down, and get to this position we call the mount. Why is this such an advantageous position? We can see that Stephan has a great size advantage over me, but if he reaches for my face, notice I can reach his, he can't reach mine. It's a huge discrepancy between our capacities from here. It's like in the art of war, they say if you're fighting on a hill, is it better be at the top fighting down or bottom fighting up? Top fighting down. It's an unfair advantage. And the mount is a clear example of how positioning can really advantage the top person independent of their size. Now, one of the most basic escapes we learn from here, from Stephan's perspective, is when, say, I'm trying to choke him, he traps my arm, he traps my foot, he bridges up and takes me over. Now, I'm on bottom, but am I underneath the mount? No, this is a distinctly different position. This is one of the first things you want to understand when you're new to Jiu-Jitsu, that there are big differences between positions. Yes, it's not good to be on bottom, but the difference between the mount and this situation is that my legs are free. So even though Stephan is on top, he's only got 2 limbs to use against my 4. And so how do we understand this position? It's easier to understand when Stephan's standing. Say in a self-defense context, he wants to hit me. For him to make contact, he needs to get close enough to me. What are my legs doing? What is the function that my legs are performing right now? They're guarding me. They're guarding my upper body. And so we refer to this position as the guard. The guard not only keeps you safe from danger, it actually allows you to knock your opponent down and get back up on top. It allows you to control distance and get off the ground. And I'll get you to come down. It allows you to maneuver into positions where you can submit your partner. A submission, for those that are newer, is a technique. Here's another example. A technique that is going to force the opponent to give up. Why do they give up? Well, there are 2 types of submissions. There are joint locks. So we notice Stephan's arm goes from 90 degrees to 180, but it doesn't go past 180. If we can find a leverage-based way to take it past its natural range of motion, here our hips, our strongest body part, go right into his elbow at its weakest point, we can hyperextend his arm. That's one type of submission, a joint attack. If he pulls that arm out, we can bring this leg to the other side. And now on this side, the inside of my knee cuts off the blood to his brain. On the other side, his own shoulder presses in
And if he doesn't give up, he goes to sleep. So these two types of submissions, joint locks and chokes, are available to whoever is in the dominant position. So even though I'm on bottom, being in the guard allows me to catch submissions or get off my back or knock him down, what we call sweeping, and getting up on top. So let's switch for a quick sec. So understanding that if Stephan's on his back, he would rather be here in his guard with his legs between us than me mounted on him. Theoretically, if I'm on top, that's great for me, but I'd rather, if I had my choice, I'd rather be mounted than here. But what's getting in the way? It's his guard. So we want to do what's called passing guard. We want to get around the legs here. Once we get around the legs, yes, we could mount, but being past the legs is its own benefit. There's a third position that emerges here where I've gotten past his legs, but I'm not mounted. We're more in this cross-body position, what we call side control. I don't have the same breadth of options that I have in the mount, but I still have a dominant position where I don't have to worry about his legs. I have weight on him. I have freedom of my limbs to start attacking joint locks and chokes. And so now we're starting to build a hierarchy of positions. If I'm on top, in a sense, this is the worst spot to be. It's not bad that I'm on top, it's good, but I'd rather pass his guard and get side control. Even better than side control is the mount. Now, in a way I like to teach this last position is to show the person on bottom being desperate and making a big mistake, sitting up to their elbow and just trying to get out. When they do this, we see this little pocket open up. We're going to cup their neck, slide our knee in. Let's actually rotate so that one can see a little deeper. We slide our knee into this pocket, and now we pull them over to this side. From here, now we have a fourth position, the back. Notice all of Stephan's tools are facing away, all of mine are facing him. Notwithstanding, his neck is very exposed to yet another submission, and his arms as well are vulnerable to attack with joint locks. So we have these four basic positions: the mount, the guard, side control, and the back. But if there are four positions, there must be 8, because there's an offensive and defensive version of each. So what's the best position? The back. What's the worst position? The back. And so this helps create a real robust hierarchy.
The back, if you're caught in it.
If you're defensive, yes. So the best position would be me having Stephan's back. The worst position would be Stephan having my back. Now this creates, again, a hierarchy. We want to always go from worst to best. And we also want to, this starts helping us understand the importance of position before submission. A really important concept that there are very few examples, but there are some examples where even in bad spots, I could submit my partner. For me to focus my energy on trying to submit my partner from a weak position is a very bad strategy, because if it doesn't work, I'm still here, yes, and I'm going to get caught. So what we want to be thinking about instead is, how do I get to a slightly better position? Even if, so I'm starting to escape the back, even if Stephan mounts. Is this good for me? No, but it's better than I was. It's one step improvement. And this idea of slight, small steps forward is very important in the idea that what is it that makes Jiu-Jitsu so powerful? It's positioning. So if I can make slight improvements in my position, that's progress. Now, so we've got this positional hierarchy. We've got inferior positions and superior positions. And so your job on the way to blue belt is to learn how to escape inferior positions. And there's actually something you have to do before escaping, but we'll talk about that. Establish superior positions, meaning not only hold them or get to them, but then actually control them, preventing the person from escaping. And then from superior positions, you have really two jobs. You can improve to an even better superior position, or you can submit the person. Now, we said that there was something you had to do before escaping. And let's look at an example from Stephan on his back. So there's a joint lock and you can test this on yourself. If you come up here, you have if you put your arms like this, you have a natural range of motion. It doesn't matter how flexible you are. You could go back 90 degrees, but you will have a limit. Now, if we can take you past that limit with leverage, you're going to have to submit. Now, there are certain dynamics at play. Notice I can go back further when my elbows are up like this than I can here, right? So this creates an understanding of this very simple submission, the key lock here. Now, does Stephan want to get submitted? No. For him to start with his arm up there would be obviously unwise because it's just too easy for me to come here. Wouldn't it be better for him to be here because now I have to work to get there? So this introduces a really vital concept that is so often overlooked, posture. In a bad spot, there are many variations. Stephan could be here or it could be here. We want to start with our limbs in bad spots in the optimal position, the position that's going to keep us safest from attack. So before he thinks about escaping, he has to make sure that he's next to invulnerable in bad spots. And that's what posture does. And we can see many examples of this. For example, for me, we said that it was beneficial to have his arm way out to the side. So keeping his elbows tight is really valuable. Another point of advantage for me is if I can get under his head here, now I can put some real pressure. I can start manipulating him in quite a few ways. So does he want me to get under his head? No. And you'll see this, you'll even see like good purple and brown belts, sometimes even black belts in competition just because they're used to doing it in training. They'll lift their head for their opponent. Conversely, if Stephan tucks his chin, now it's a lot of work to get under there. It doesn't mean I won't, but it's work. And this is the concept of posturing, getting into the optimal position for your body within a bad spot. So on your way to blue belt, it's not enough to just know moves. You have to know how to behave in certain spots. There are certain places where you're leaving yourself vulnerable. You can't accept that. So as a blue belt, you have to know how to posture in inferior positions so that you can escape to either a better inferior position or eventually a superior position. You have to know how to control those superior positions. You have to know how to improve your position. We'll come back to what that means exactly. Then you have to know how to submit your partner. Now, before we move on from controlling or improving your position, so I'm in the mount, and if we use the hierarchy we described, then the next best position is the back. So improving my position from here theoretically means I go from mount to the back. But we have to understand, just like from the bottom person's perspective or the inferior person's perspective, there were weak positions to start in and strong positions to start in. Improving my position doesn't mean just taking one quantum leap to the next best position. It could be improving my position within this position. So for example, a general rule is the higher up on the person's body you are, the less of them you have to deal with. So for example, if I can slide all the way up here, I'm still in the mount, and we'll go give an extreme example where I've isolated this limb. Now, I'm still in the mount. It's a variation of the mount we call the S mount. But now Stephan has almost nothing to defend with. He even this arm is not useful for him, and it's very easy for me to attack this one. So when we talk about improving position, it doesn't just mean jumping to a new position. It also means improving your position within a set position. Now, that's now giving us a pretty robust framework of what a blue belt should understand. And Jiu-Jitsu does specialize on the ground. So if you don't have what we've described so far, offense and defense from mount, guard, side, and back, you're not even close to the conversation. Now, when we're on the feet, again, matches don't start on the ground. They start on the feet. So having different ways to take the fight to the ground becomes very important. It could be something very simple like an ankle kick here. It could be something more classic like a hip throw. But having ways to take the fight to the ground become important. And one thing that's evolved with Jiu-Jitsu over the last many years is the sport of Jiu-Jitsu has become so popular that many schools focus just on producing strong competitors. And some folks, and we've talked about this in the past, some folks feel that
that's really losing a lot of the effectiveness of jiu-jitsu. And what we mean by that is jiu-jitsu was designed originally as a form of self-defense. So I say this to my students all the time, the worst thing that can happen is that you can tap good blue belts or purple belts or brown belts or black belts, and then someone who's untrained, whether in the gym or on the street, comes in and does something kind of thug-like or just uneducated in a jiu-jitsu sense, and you don't know how to deal with it. And this is the concern of, the legends of the sport, like the, Rickson Gracie and Henry and Huron Gracie, that really try to emphasize the self-defense aspect. And so we have to know, it's not enough to just be a good wrestler. Like, what if he punched me in the face right now in a different context? We have to understand the self-defense aspects and how to control someone who's trying to hurt us, how to deal with punches and kicks and someone grabbing us from behind. If we don't have self-defense built in, like, for example, if I'm in my guard here and we're playing sport, well, it's fine to let Stephan be this high up and I can be looking for, sweeps and whatnot. But as soon as we're talking a self-defense context, having this distance, it's too easy for him to punch me in the head. And so if I don't have strategies for tying him up and making it impossible for him to hit me, making it such that he can't go hit me now. Right. And we can see that there are safe spots in a self-defense context that we can get to, let alone that. So for those that are new, that aren't familiar, this or this position allow us to get to spots where, again, self-defense, putting the person to sleep is a really, from a self-defense perspective, invaluable to be able to not only control someone. And then it's worth noting, and this is maybe injecting a little bit of my philosophy as opposed to the overall discussion, because every school is going to have their own philosophy on what a blue belt needs to have. But one of the most powerful things about jiu-jitsu is, for me, it's the only non-violent and effective martial art. Think about, you're at a barbecue with some friends, family, and someone you know and care about is having a mental health issue, and they start getting violent with someone. If your only tools are punching and kicking and in a violent or aggressive form of martial arts, how are you supposed to protect those you care about from that other person you care about without having to hurt them?
You punch Uncle Fred's teeth down his throat and then boot stomp.
You know my Uncle Fred. Okay. Well, that's the thing. Jiu-jitsu allows you, if punching and kicking are fire, jiu-jitsu's water. It allows you to smother violence. And so I would suggest having strategies that allow you to protect yourself and those you care about, and even protect those you're trying to control from hurting themselves, is one of the real powerful aspects of jiu-jitsu. So positional escapes, or posture escapes, controls, transitions, meaning positional improvements, and submissions on the ground from the back, side control, mount, and the guard, takedowns, and self-defense, which doesn't mean just being able to take someone down in a self-defense. It might mean literally escaping when they grab you by the wrist or they grab you by the torso, or it might even be knowing how to diffuse a situation with your words. But I would say that gives us a pretty robust picture of what a blue belt should know. And one of the concerns, and part of the reason I like to focus on curriculum, is that's a lot of information. And most schools, this is not a knock on anyone. There are such wonderful instructors out there who really put their heart and soul into their instruction. But often you'll see schools most schools, I would say, don't have a curriculum. And so what happens is that students go into a school and they'll be seeing a new technique every week, and it's hard to know what you don't know. For example, you learn 3 techniques. It kind of matters whether that's 3 of 10 or 3 of 30 or 3 of 300. So having a sense of the big picture is very useful on the way to blue belt. And most schools that do have a blue belt curriculum will have between 50 and 150 techniques. You can be a good blue belt knowing 50 techniques, but you're inevitably going to end up in situations where we would consider them basic situations of even those 4 basic positions where you don't quite know what to do. And so what you want is to, even if you're on your own personal journey of development in your jiu-jitsu, you want to map out those 4 basic positions, standing situations, and self-defense situations, and you want to make sure that you know how to, again, posture, escape, control, improve, and submit from all of them, and so that you feel very complete even at the basic level. And then beyond that, on the way to purple through black, then it's just basically taking that same approach to more advanced positions. Purple belt might not include.
There are more than 4 positions.
Oh, there are arguably hundreds, and so purple belt might include. In my teaching, purple belt has over 30 positions because there are variations on each of those basic positions. But I think that gives us a pretty robust picture of what a blue belt should know. And the biggest thing, and I say that you can be a good blue belt knowing just 50 techniques. Why? Because what separates jiu-jitsu from other arts is your ability to roll, your ability to spar against a resisting opponent. And this is where I'd come back to that self-defense discussion. I do think there is a valid argument for why self-defense needs to stay part of most people's training, because again, to be a high-level competitor and not know what to do when someone throws a punch is not great. At the same time, what makes jiu-jitsu so powerful is not just the techniques, it's the sparring. And if you can compete against another trained jiu-jitsu person and deal with an ever-changing situation, I think you're far more ahead of your ability to protect yourself than someone who does, say, a traditional martial art that's dealing with, someone coming at you like this or punching you this way, but not actually sparring with real resistance. So I think sometimes we get lost in the self-defense sport debate. I think so long as you're sparring against resisting opponents, you're way ahead of being ready for a real self-defense situation than someone who's not. And then this, as we've talked about in the past, the adrenaline dump you get from competing pushes you so much further ahead for being really ready for a real situation than just anything you can experience in the gym.
How many techniques are there in your curriculum that you're sharing with people?
In mine, there are over 300, which it theoretically presents 2 problems. 1 for the instructor to teach that much, and then 2 for the student to absorb that much. And just like any other form of education, one of the problems I've tried to solve, or one of the ways I've tried to solve this problem, is chunking information. If I teach you 300 separate moves, like I teach you one takedown on its own, you have to learn 300 different examples of that. That's a lot of information. The way we solve this is by chunking things into game plans. So I'll teach you a takedown, to a guard pass, to a way to mount, to a way to take the back, to a submission. So I've taught you one game plan, but I've taught you 5 techniques. And that idea of chunking information is really useful. So we break it down into 16 topics, each with 6 game plans, and that show you variations of different situations. And so really 96 game plans total, but it covers an incredible amount of information so that you never end up in that situation where you're facing someone who's junior to you as a blue belt and you don't know what to do. That's not what I wanted for myself. It's not what I want for my students. It's not what I would want for you if you decide to, really pursue excellence in becoming a blue belt or beyond. And then also the other problem that it's designed to solve is for the instructors out there who are trying to create great training environments, but don't necessarily have that structure. This is something I wish I had coming up.
Okay. And where do you stand in introducing sparring to people? If you go and sign up at 5 different schools, you're going to have 5 different introductions to sparring. Some schools will have you sparring right away. Mm-hmm. Some schools will have you do positional sparring. Some schools will say no sparring for the first 2 months or whatever. Mm-hmm. I've even seen 6 months. Mm-hmm. I came up in an environment where you were thrown to the wolves on day 1, and thus I'm biased. Mm-hmm. But I wonder what your thinking is on, and so I'm biased in favor of that. Mm-hmm. But there are other people trying to do other things. What are your thoughts on when to introduce sparring into a curriculum, into a training progression?
Yeah, so we came up in an age, in the 90s when there were no, safety concerns. There were
neck cramps?
Uniforms. Sure. Yeah, right. And that was great for guys like us or people like us who, didn't mind getting banged up here and there. But how many people started when we started and got hurt early on and just stopped? And for me, that's a waste. So at the same time, I think you really hold people back by waiting too long before they spar. And so to try in my school, the healthy balance is we do positional sparring for the first, say, month. So meaning we'll start in the mount, bottom person is trying to get out, top person is trying to submit them or take their back. And we keep it limited that way so that people aren't trying to spar from a position they've never seen, but they get ready kind of building one of those 4 basic positions step at a time. One of the most dangerous, or one of the places that injuries happen most, is on the feet to floor transition during takedowns. So we wait generally a month or 2 before we have people spar from the feet so that they have a bit more grounding in how to fall safely, how to get out of dangerous positions on the way down, and how to actually take someone down before just throwing them into the wild, so to speak, as we experienced coming up.
Okay. And final question, how long do you think, given the person can train 3 or 2 to 4 times a week, how long do you think it takes the average person to reach blue belt level?
That's a good question. I'd say between 8 and 18 months. We've seen people do it in 6. We've seen people do it much less as well, but I would say they're more prodigies.
And they came with by the way, I'm an Olympic wrestler and a judo black belt.
Yeah, we won't discuss Travis Stevens, but there are people who have backgrounds that's not the kind of situation we're talking about. We've seen people take 2 years and more, and everyone learns at their own level. But I'd say on average, if you're training regularly, you're healthy, you've got a good environment, good instruction, and I would say some structure. And say you don't have structure where you're learning, well, then it's really on you to take notes and try to devise that structure. And even what we've discussed today of giving you this positional hierarchy gives you a way to categorize what you're learning. So I'd say generally 8 to 18 months is a safe range. It's a pretty big range, but if you're training regularly, you're sparring regularly, you've got good instruction, somewhere in there, I think is fair rough time.
Awesome. Well, I think that gives people a really good idea of what they can hopefully expect on their journey to blue belt, and hopefully make it a little bit less painful and a little bit smoother. We'll
hopefully
grease the blue belt chute.
There we go.
That sounds really wrong.